Hi, hey, welcome to Academy 101 with the Foundation for Financial Education. My name is Brannon Lloyd, and we're going to go through a case study and case design real quick on one of our actual clients here. So we've got Alberto and Olga de los Santos. They are a little younger than your usual retirement client, if you will. You can see Alberto's only 52, and his wife Olga is a little bit older at 55. They want to retire at age 60, and as you'll see in a second, they're both engineers, which I think is kind of funny. I'm in Houston, Texas. We have a lot of engineering clients down here, and before I was associated with the foundation and learned the techniques and strategies that Jonathan taught me, if an engineer walked into my office and said they wanted help with retirement planning, I would do anything I could to try and maybe get them to a different advisor or something. I'd almost rather chew my arm off than work with an engineer because they're so detail oriented and they ask a lot of questions. They take a long time to make decisions. These are kind of the stereotypes that you have with engineers. And yet here we have a husband and wife team. They're both engineers. And with the systems and the processes that the foundation teaches, engineers love this process. We use spreadsheets. Engineers love spreadsheets. The numbers are very clear. The process is very simple. And so now when an engineer comes in wanting some help, I look at that as almost a guarantee that we'll be able to work with them and help them because of the way the system works. So let me walk you through this really quick so you can see it. I have their life cycle model pulled up. We did get their Social Security statement, so we have a good idea of what they're looking like from Social Security. Obviously, if they want to retire at age 60, they're not going to have Social Security immediately at retirement. And in fact, we're going to try to put a plan together for them where they can wait until maximum age 70 to pull their Social Security. Not a lot in bank accounts. They don't have it listed here, but there's only a few $1,000s in their checking account. They keep it that way. And they have, she works for Wood Engineering. He works at Chevron. You can see here that he has an abandoned 401k from his time at Occidental Petroleum. And then they have a couple of IRAs at Ameriprise. They are contributing currently to the Chevron ESIP, that's Employee Stock Investment Plan. That's what Chevron calls their 401k. And you can see he's contributing the max and she's contributing the max, and they're getting a match. In addition to that, they're also contributing to their IRAs every single year as well. They also have a child. They have 3 children. Andres is their youngest. He's 16. He's going to be going to college. So we figure that their annual college cost will be, after financial aid, merit-based aid, et cetera, will probably be somewhere around $30,000 a year. A couple of other concerns. Alberto is starting to hear some layoff rumblings over at Chevron, so that's a concern of his as well. He is the primary breadwinner at $190,000 a year. They have a couple of life insurance policies. For those of you who have been in the industry a while, you will immediately recognize that making $355,000 a year, they only have $100,000 each of adjustable life insurance through Northwestern Mutual. That's not nearly enough. So there's a conversation there to have about their coverage. There's a conversation about how they feel about just having $100,000 worth of coverage. They do not have any coverage. I'm taking back. He has coverage through work, but she does not. She works at a smaller firm that does not offer any kind of life insurance coverage. They do not have any kind of long-term care benefit or terminal illness benefit or any kind of chronic illness benefit built into this policy at all. So there's an opportunity here to have a conversation about life insurance, which is something that we in fact did. And we'll talk about how we got there and where we found the premium, that type of thing. We also have, as you can see, we've got a 529 plan, and then he also has a brokerage account at Ameriprise of $795,000 he set aside, and this is mostly stock. So with the drop that we had earlier this year, you can imagine how he's feeling about his stock account right now. and he has his home is currently worth about $650,000. He owes right around $400,000. He has his original mortgage on his homestead. HS stands for homestead. Is $1,800. He's got a 4% interest rate, and then he went and got a home equity line of credit through Bank of America at 5.2% for another $100,000. His current balance right now on that is $93,000. So there's also an opportunity to talk to him about maybe consolidating those two, especially since his credit is good and his interest rate might be a little bit lower right now. So you can see he's got quite a bit of time to pay. So maybe rolling those two together might also free up some additional monies for them. Otherwise, they don't have any debt at all. They pay cash for their cars. They don't maintain any kind of balance on credit cards. So overall, they're very, very financially stable. So I started out talking to this family about, what obviously when they wanted to retire, how much income they felt they needed in retirement, and how they were invested now versus how they felt with the recent correction, that type of thing. And there's a big interest, at least on Alberto's standpoint, for maybe moving this Oxy 401k here to something that's a little bit safer, and perhaps something that he can contribute to as well. And then their IRAs both took a beating. Interestingly enough, he's got a brokerage account here that's mostly stock, but in their IRAs, they're allocated mostly inside of mutual funds. So that sets us up with an opportunity to kind of look at what they're doing, talk about protections, talk about maybe minimizing their downside risk or using some kind of volatility control strategy so that they don't experience the kind of losses that they experienced in March of this year. So we've got some real opportunities here. Again, we've got an opportunity here to look at their life insurance and put them in a much better position from a protection standpoint with the life insurance, in addition to being able to offer them some long-term care strategies and that kind of thing without having to come out of pocket additionally for long-term care coverage. And we have some opportunities to talk to them about not only this abandoned 401k right here, but also what they're doing with their IRAs and what they're doing with their brokerage account. So I started out by talking to them about taxes, obviously, right? Because now is an excellent opportunity for us to be looking at Roth conversions. So looking at the difference between what they're making right now versus what their tax bracket might be in future years. So I'll show you guys what that looks like when I do it. So I start talking to them about the current tax environment. I talked to them a little bit about the upcoming election and what they think might happen there. And the general consensus among both of them is that taxes will probably be going up in their lifetime, right? And in fact, he mentioned to me, without me having to say it, that yeah, he thinks he's probably one of the lowest tax times that he's ever seen in the history of the United States, right? So I agreed with him. I said, yeah, the environment right now is very, very good for doing some Roth conversions and trying to get some of that money into a position where it's no longer taxed. So I walked them through the difference between a Roth IRA versus the traditional IRA and what they're doing right now. So let me show you guys how I do that really quickly. I basically use an Excel spreadsheet for everything. So if we go over here to Excel, I'm just going to open up a new spreadsheet really quick. Keep in mind that we're also, because of the coronavirus, we're doing all of our meetings virtually right now. And so one of the things that I've heard from talking to other advisors is they're having a hard time closing business virtually. And I will tell you that here in our practice, we have not experienced that. And I'll tell you the reason we haven't experienced that is because we use the foundation system, lockstep with the way Jonathan teaches it. So I'll pull up an Excel spreadsheet and I'll say, okay, so we're going to assume, let me make this a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. So the first thing I say is, okay, I know that a 25% tax bracket doesn't exist right now. but it makes the math really easy. So we're just gonna assume a 25% tax bracket, and they generally laugh about that. And I say, okay, on this side we're gonna show a Roth IRA, and on this side we're gonna show a traditional IRA. And I'll just write Roth and traditional IRA right here inside Excel. I'll say in both cases we're gonna put $10,000 aside, right? And I'll go ahead and I'll make that dollar amount. I'll come over here and I'll make this dollar amount as well. And so we're going to put $10,000 aside in both cases, both in the Roth and the IRA. So if we're going to take $10,000 out of income and place it into a retirement vehicle, the strategies are a little bit different, right? Because if we're going to do it on the Roth side, we have to pay the taxes up front. So if we're going to remove $10,000 from our income stream and set it aside for retirement in a Roth, we're going to pay taxes on that now, which is going to be $2,500 if we're in a 25% tax bracket. And then I will generally stop and I'll say, does that make sense, or do you agree? I always want to get the client's buy-in when I'm doing this and make sure I haven't lost them. Again, in this case, both of them are engineers, but sometimes you run into a situation where you don't have somebody who's as good with numbers. And so you always want to make sure that they understand where that number comes from and move forward. It makes them, again, we're the foundation for financial education. And so everything that we're doing is to help educate the client. And so I want to make sure that they understand that. And then I tell them, okay, so if you're going to remove $10,000 from income to put aside to retirement and a traditional IRA, then you're not going to pay any taxes at this time, right? So our taxes on that would be zero, right? So at the end of the day, if we subtract $2,500 in taxes from our primary amount, now we're going to have $7,500 on the Roth side. And since we didn't have to remove any money from the traditional side to pay taxes, we'll still have our full $10,000 here, right? And they'll agree. Okay, so let's say that over the course of time, we doubled that money. So in both cases, the money is doubled. Oops. There we go. And then then I'll ask them to do the math. I'll say, okay, so how much do we have on the Roth IRA side if our money doubles? And they always say $15,000, right? And I'll say, and how much money do we have on the traditional side at this point? And they'll say $20,000. I'll say, okay, so now we want to pull the money out to use it to go on vacation or to help our grandkids pay for college, right? So when we pull the money out of the Roth side, how much do we pay in taxes at this point? Sometimes they won't know the answer to that question, but you'll say, well, you're not going to have any taxes due at this point because the money has grown tax-free. So at that point, you'll pay zero in taxes, and you'll pull the entire $15,000 out and put it into your checking account. But on the traditional side, what's happened? Well, we've had to pay taxes now, right? And if we're still in a 25% tax bracket, how much is 25% of $20,000? And they'll say, well, that's $5,000. So now we're pulling out $5,000. We're having to pay $5,000 in taxes. And how much do we end up putting in our checking account? And it ends up being the same amount. And then I'll as they go through and they indicate the understanding toward this, I'll congratulate them. I'll tell them that they now know more about Roth versus traditional than most CPAs that I know. Make a little joke like that, and then I'll explain to them. I'll say, so you can see that as long as taxes remain the same, it doesn't really matter. One of the things that you'll hear people say is, well, if you have a traditional IRA, you'll end up paying more in taxes. And that's true, right? We ended up paying $2,500 in taxes versus $5,000 in taxes. But it's not how much you earn, it's how much you keep. And as long as the tax bracket remains the same, it doesn't matter how many years pass, you're going to end up with the same amount of money coming into your pocket using either the Roth strategy or the traditional strategy. But then I say, but what happens then if taxes go up? And that's when they say, oh, okay, I see. So if you agree with me that taxes are going to rise in the future, it makes sense to pay the taxes now in a lower environment than it does paying later. And then there are also some additional advantages to the Roth IRA that you don't get in a traditional IRA. And these are also true for things like 401ks or 403bs, et cetera. The first advantage with a Roth, regardless of whether or not you're going to pay the same amount of taxes, is that a Roth IRA does not require you to have a minimum distribution when you reach the age of 72. And I'll typically go in and talk to them a little bit about the Secure Act and the changes that were made there, and fill them in with that. Most people are not aware that the Secure Act, in addition to raising the mandatory age for taking a required minimum distribution to 72, it also took away some provisions for stretch IRAs. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then I'll say not only that, but when this money passes to your beneficiaries, non-spousal beneficiaries like your kids, they don't pay any taxes at all. Whereas on this case, they're going to be forced to pull that money out now over a 10-year period and pay taxes on it. And that usually surprises them as well. So they can see that not only are we helping them avoid paying taxes in the future, potentially at a higher rate, but we're also helping them a little bit with their estate. We're helping them with some generational planning, that kind of thing. They're usually very, very grateful to receive this information. It's really straightforward. Again, I just do it. If they're in the office, I'll do it on a whiteboard. But if we're doing it via GoToMeeting or Zoom, I'll just open up an Excel spreadsheet and I'll go through that with them really quickly. It positions me as an expert, and it also shows it to them in a way that they've never seen it before and helps them with their understanding. So after I've done that, we go back and I'll start talking about the tax bracket that they're currently in. So let me close this sheet really quick. I don't want to save it. Thank you. So, and again, these are both engineers. They're very, very good at what they do, but no one had explained that to them. And so they expressed some gratitude that I took the time to show them the difference there. And then we started talking about the fact that, well, their income right now is $355,000. And if you look at the taxes, you look at their tax bracket right now at $355,000, you can see. Again, these are the 2019 rates. Married filing jointly, they're in a 32% tax bracket right now. Okay, so when you're they were saying, well, if we're going to be in a 32% tax bracket now, why would we Roth convert? And so I just kind of pointed out to them. I said, well, once your Social Security kicks in, even if you pull a 4%. Go back and look real quick. We're talking about having retirement income of $283,000 once their Social Security kicks in. And if you look at if we agree that even if nothing happens and the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act just sunsets, right? They're going to be looking at returning to 2017 rates. And so I just went back with them and pulled up 2017 tax brackets. From taxfoundation.org right here. I went through and looked at married filing jointly, and showed that they're going to be in a 33% bracket, right? With just the income that they're going to have right now. And that's if they don't raise taxes. Oh, I also pointed out to them that, we just gave away, what was it, $2.4 trillion. That money's we essentially just printed that money. So that money's going to have to come from somewhere. Plus, if you look at the Social Security Trust, the changes that they need to make there. So they both agreed that it's unlikely that in retirement they'd be in even the 33% bracket. It's more likely they might be in a 35 or even a 39% bracket, depending on politics, depending on the national deficit, et cetera. So they were very, very eager to start converting some of their money to Roth. And if you go back and look at the way the tax brackets work right now, you can see that based on their current income of $355,000, they've still got another roughly $55,000 worth of room that they can convert per year into Roth. So I had that conversation with them. They agreed, and then of course the conversation rolls around to, well, okay, well, what should we do with that money? And so that's when I started to talk to them about volatility controlled indexes, looking at various strategies using momentum investing and that kind of thing. And so then we got into a conversation about indexes. And I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but I love indexes. The foundation loves indexes. Jonathan Lee preaches indexes. There's really, and because of their performance, because of their simplicity, and because typically if you're investing in an index fund, you have little or no fees. And so I just started out by asking him, what do you know about indexes? And it's really funny. Typically speaking, I'll get two answers. I'll get the know-it-all answer, well, I'm an engineer and I know everything, or I'll get the nothing, right? And of course, the know-it-all answer is never exactly right. I've been doing this since Jonathan taught me how to do this, I guess, for the last almost 3 years now. Not once have I had someone say, well, it's just a measure of the market. Right? They usually start, when I say, what do you know about indexes? They usually start telling me about index funds, right? And so I'll hear, low fees, really, really simple. They're, it's a buy and hold strategy. I'll hear all this stuff. So I'll stop and I'll say, well, hang on one second. That you're talking about index funds, and I think index funds are fantastic. But when we talk about just the index itself, what do you know? And that's when I'll go over and I'll pull up Yahoo Finance. To get rid of these really quick. And I'll say, have you heard the term broad index? And they'll say, yes, I've heard that term almost always, right? I'll say, well, you've heard the term narrow index. They'll say yes. I'll say, well, so the indexes are just a measure. And I will go to, let me just do this really quick. I will go just type in index definition in the Google search bar here, and it brings up dictionary.com. And I'll say, there's two types of indexes. There's an alphabetical list of names. That's, like the index at the back of the book, right? And they say, oh, yes. And I'll say, and the other definition is just an indicator, sign, or measure of something. So when you hear the term S&P 500 index, that's just a measure of the U.S. Stock market, if you will. And I'll say, and again, there's narrow indexes and there's broad indexes. So, and then I'll make a joke. I'll say, so guess how many stocks are in the Dow 30? And I'll just shut up. And sometimes it takes them by surprise. But let's say 30. Sometimes they'll have a question like that, or they'll say, 30. I'll say, yeah. So you think that's a really good a slice of the American economy? And in Alberto's case, he said no. And I also know that there are a few stocks in that index tend to drive that index. So I agreed with him there. One of the things I'll tell you, even if the customer is wrong, Jonathan teaches this concept of dropping the rope. He talks about in tug of war, if you have a tug of war, both people are pulling against each other. So the best thing to do in that situation is just not engage, just drop the rope. So if I have a client who tells me something that I know is blatantly false, as long as it's not going to affect their future in a negative way, right? If I had a client tell me, smoking is good for you, and I know that smoking cigarettes is going to make me live longer, I would feel obligated to remove that illusion from his psyche. But if they tell me that so some of the stocks in the Dow 30 don't have any effect on the economy or anything along those lines, I'll just agree with them, right? I think that's the best way to go. They're not going to remember the conversation later on anyway. It doesn't make any difference in the overall health of their financial situation. And so just dropping the rope on that. And so, when they start talking to me about index funds and that kind of thing, I'll agree with them. Yes, that's absolutely correct. Yes, 100%, right? And I'll kind of introduce the idea, they're talking about index funds and then move back to indexes. So I'll say, so guess how many stocks are in the S&P 500 index? And of course, they'll say 500, and I'll say in the Russell 2000, they'll say 2000, right? And so the idea of getting them comfortable with indexes helps them out. And then you can use that strategy. If you go through and you look at some of the videos that Jonathan has done on how to blow up their island and that kind of thing, you can then, after you've had this conversation about indexes with them, you can show them that there's a better way of doing things, and it makes you look really smart, and it helps you when it comes time to transition assets. So we'll have a conversation about indexes, and then I went through using John's strategy and showed them, he had a bunch of BlackRock mutual funds. Like I said, most of his account with his brokerage account with Ameriprise, this is all stocks, right? So the conversation I had with him about that was, don't you think maybe we want to take some of that money off the table and put it somewhere where it can't lose value, but still has the opportunity to grow? So I kind of illustrated that with him. I actually asked him if he'd ever been to Vegas and talked about, because he likes to go to Vegas, and talked about, if you're up a lot on blackjack, don't you want to pull some of that money off the table in case the cards turn against you? And he agreed. So we talked about maybe taking some of the money that's in his brokerage account, looking at the fact that cap gains are extremely low right now. So now's another opportunity to harvest from that and maybe pay 15% capital gains as opposed to having to pay 20 or 25 or 30%, depending on what the elections bring later on. He agreed with that. And then we talked about positioning these IRAs somewhere where they can't lose value because he's got, you can see he's 52 right now. He wants to retire at age 60. So surrender periods inside annuities are not going to be a factor for him at all, because typically speaking, he'll be accessing that money after the surrender period is over. And so that was a very, very easy conversation to have with him. And then the last thing that we talked about was the fact that they're contributing to these tax deferred accounts, whereas they're in a very low environment now. And so if it makes sense to start harvesting to save money on taxes here, might it be a good idea to perhaps reallocate some of the monies that they're putting into their 401ks and IRAs into something that will provide them with protection against medical expenses later on? And so this is where we ended up getting the premium for their life insurance policies. And so I ended up putting, from this $100,000 that they had here, I ended up putting $1 million policies on each one of them, and talked to him a little bit about the advantages of what that would do from a long-term care standpoint. Before we even finished our meeting, I had him agree to get paramedicals done for both him and Olga. So we scheduled the paramedics, told them about how underwriting would give us a good idea of how much that would cost, showed him that we could, for the same amount of money that he was spending on the $100,000 policies, $1 million policy would not cost 10 times that amount in premium. He was very, very pleased with that. And so with this case right here, again, using the systems and the spreadsheets and the calculators that the foundation provides, we were able to take two engineers, fairly high net worth with a lot of assets to move, and bring those into a position where they are much better off. Because now, just so you guys know, we did fixed index annuities with all of this, and we did fixed index annuities with about $250,000 worth of this money, and have a couple of life insurance policies in place with them right now. Those have not closed yet. We got them underwritten. We're just really waiting on final approval there to have that done. But he's very, very excited about the fact that he's not going to have to come out of pocket with any additional money, but he's going to have a lot better coverage for him and his family, especially considering that he's got one kid still off, got to go to college, and if something happened to his income, that would be catastrophic from that standpoint. So overall, it was a very, very good case. Just using the techniques that Jonathan Lee teaches and that the foundation teaches, we were able to take what would probably a lot of advisors would look at as a pretty difficult case and do just a few minor changes with it and put them in a better position and be able to make a really nice commission on them as well. So again, this is just one out of many, many cases that we can do, taking a situation. We don't really have time to go into it as well, but I just want to point out that this ESIP that he has with Chevron had some net unrealized appreciation in it. And so we're also working with him right now on a charitable remainder trust to be able to offset the taxes that are going to be due when he I mean, he pulls money out of his ESIP in a few years. So I also broached that subject with him, and he'd never heard of that before. And it just, again, provided additional value. There's nothing we're going to be able to do about that right now because he doesn't have access to those funds. But he knows that when it is time to take that money out, we're going to have a solution in place for him that's going to allow him to save a lot more money on taxes. So that's the case here for Alberto and Olga. I hope it was helpful for you guys. Hope you guys learned something. And I look forward to talking to you again soon at one of our other case study calls.